Hello and welcome to the EXANTE Diet Expert channel. You know how they say that the older you get, the policemen begin to look younger and younger. Well, take a look at how young the clinically obese are getting. And yet we're being told all the time to go to the gym, be more health conscious, to fill up on starchy veggies. But aren't chips starchy veggies? To a great extent, we're confused by all the mixed messages that are out there. And it isn't working. The message isn't getting through. Well, I think it's because the advice we're given. I think it's because there needs to be a crackdown on the food manufacturers who peddle basically dangerous products with pictures of idyllic farms on the labels, not the factory in which they're manufactured. We live in a world where low in fat, no added sugar, 100% natural goodness hides the toxicity within, where the message on the front of the package says 90 calories, but in reality, in an edible state, it's 450 calories. It's criminal. And the crime is the killing of our population. We are told to eat plenty of starchy carbohydrates, rice, pasta, potatoes, and for them to make up 60% of our meals. And when we feel peckish, to snack on fruit, because fruit's healthy, right? And fruit juice is just a convenient package compared to the actual fruit. You have to peel a juice box. Otherwise, they're identical, yeah? And vegetarians are cool. They're like saving the planet, right, guys? Rubbish. It's killing us. The end product of male cattle eating grass is killing us. I'd like to take you all on a bit of a journey, exploring the science that underpins low carbohydrate diets. And in the process, I'd like you to take away a few things. I want to debunk the calories in, calories out, low fat hypothesis of weight loss. This is not thermodynamics. It's biochemistry 101, so relax. It's not rocket science. I want to show you that a low carbohydrate diet will extend your life. People live longer when they eat low carbohydrate diets and low in sugar because fructose has some particularly unique and toxic effects on the body. I will dedicate an entire video sometime soon on this particular poison, but for now, a more general view. I've been following the conventional advice all my life. I took exercise, went to the gym, played sports. I ate low fat everything. But it doesn't work, or rather it no longer works. The advice that worked when I was 28 won't work now that I'm 58. And the science behind that statement is rock solid. When I was 28, my body was capable of dealing with the crap I ate. Now it isn't, broken. So who's responsible? Who's to blame? I would argue that the blame should actually lie with the doctors or the health professionals, because the implication of the advice we've been given and the arrogance behind that advice is that if you fail to lose weight, you're lazy, you're greedy, and you're just not trying hard enough. But this very premise overlooks the key essence to understanding weight loss, and that's hormones. The conventional calories in, calories out hypothesis ignores the effect of hormones and ignores one particular hormone, insulin. So let's have a look at carbohydrates. More to the point, let's see what happens to your insulin levels when you eat carbohydrates. When you consume a high carb meal, you get a massive and prolonged release of insulin for over 2 hours. Now let's have a look when you have the same amount of calories, the same amount of energy, but contained within protein. Much less of a spike. And the surprising thing for many people, the same amount of calories eaten as fat is even less. So think about that for a moment. High levels of insulin are associated with obesity, and carbohydrates are the most potent stimulus we have for our bodies to release insulin. So in order for us to lose weight, we need to control the insulin level. We need to control our carbohydrate intake. It's been proven in many studies worldwide, comparing low-carb diets with low-fat diets, that in every case a low-carb diet leads to more sustained weight loss. The results were not likely due to chance because of the sheer numbers involved, so you should probably trust them. But let's change tack a little bit and have a look at our fat and talk about how insulin makes you fat, makes your fat tissue grow and grow and grow. Because once we understand this, we can understand the cause of our obesity. Now, it's interesting to know that after the age of 2, you don't make new fat cells. They're already created. And if we can work out what makes each individual fat cell grow bigger, then we can determine what makes you fatter. Every single fat cell is connected directly to a blood vessel. If you think of a bunch of grapes, the grapes are the fat cells and the stems are the blood vessels. We know that hormones spread throughout the body by being released into circulation, into blood circulation. And because of this relationship with the blood vessels, it can be delivered to each and every fat cell in our body, which is just the same way, if you like, that nutrients and water are delivered to each grape on a vine. The blood vessels also transport fat molecules called triglycerides. When we overeat, particularly when we overeat carbs, these triglycerides transport extra calories to our muscles and liver, and then the excess has to be stored somewhere else. So what happens in order to gain weight is these triglycerides get transported into the fat cells, and the fat cell gets bigger. The problem is that a triglyceride molecule is very big. It's composed of 4 different parts. It has a glycerol backbone and 3 separate fatty acids which join onto the glycerol backbone. And so it's so big that it can't enter into a fat cell. So it has to be chopped up first, and that's insulin's job. So it gets cut up into pieces, which are the glycerol and the 3 fatty acids, by LPL for short, a transfer named lipoprotein lipase. So this is an enzyme that is stimulated into action by our friend insulin. And then once those fatty acids have been released, they're able to cross through the barrier, and then they're stored as fat. Without insulin to effect it and lipoprotein lipase to chop it up, you can't store fat. Now, glucose can also enter fat cells, and it does this through a little doorway called the GLUT4 transporter. And again, it's insulin that activates this GLUT4 transporter. Once the glucose joins the party inside the fat cell, it gets converted to glycerol, and then the glycerol will link up with the fatty acids to form a complete triglyceride molecule. There you go. This is the storage form of fat. Now, to add a generous dash of unfairness for the dieter, if you want to actually burn this fat, it has to be chopped up again to leave the fat cell, because as you know from before, it can't cross the barrier of the fat cell membrane without being chopped up first. It's too big. And that can only happen when an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase is active, and insulin switches this enzyme off to protect its control over blood sugar. So you end up with a triple punch. You have lipoprotein lipase and the GLUT4 transporter being activated by insulin, and that's stuffing fat into the cell. And then you have hormone-sensitive lipase being deactivated, so it can't get back out again. You can't burn that fat when insulin is present. And so insulin, biochemically, is the cause of weight gain and the cause of fat being so stubborn to shift. So we need to calm this insulin down, and you'll have figured out that we can only do this effectively by reducing the amount of carbs that we're consuming. So let's have a look at what it is about carbs that can lead to this increase in insulin that causes obesity. To begin to understand, we have to have a look at what carbohydrates are. You know all those kinds of food that you're told are good for you? Brown rice and wholemeal bread or whole grain bread? Well, it's made of glucose, and glucose is sugar. Carbohydrates are made of sugar, and when you eat them and digest them, they end up entering the bloodstream PDQ, and that increases your blood glucose level, PDQ. How sugary a food is and how quickly it enters your bloodstream is measured on something called the glycemic index. The higher the value, the quicker it gets broken down into its sugary components, and the greater the impact on blood sugar levels. When you decide to have some rice or pasta or potatoes, the glucose that makes up these foods enters your bloodstream and does so far more quickly than it would if it were protein or fat. And in response to this increase in blood sugar, the pancreas, your little organ tucked up in your abdomen, releases a hormone, something called insulin. And then the job of this insulin is to remove the sugar from our circulation and to find ways to prevent it from re-entering unless it's safe to do so. Now it puts this sugar preferentially into our muscle tissue and our liver tissue, and then if there's any left over, that gets stuffed into the fat cells. This is where the triglycerides that we mentioned earlier do their thing. The problem is that if you have high insulin levels for long enough, that creates a condition called insulin resistance, where the receptors on the surface of the fat cells become worn out. We know that when you eat carbs, you get this massive spike of insulin. And when we do that habitually, 5 or 6 times a day, because that's what they told us to do, 3 meals plus snacks, our body becomes insensitive to the high levels of insulin. Resistance is like this. It's like when you walk into a room and there's a bad smell in there. Well, at first it seems unbearably overpowering, but after a few minutes you don't notice it anymore. Well, that's the same with insulin. At first it overpowers the cells with its signals, but eventually they just become less receptive. They stop listening. They stop reacting. But this effect almost only ever happens in the muscles and the liver tissue, and it's there that stops allowing the taking in of the sugar. So what does your body do? Your body compensates by releasing yet more insulin, and then the body is able to stuff the extra sugar into your muscles, into your liver, and into your fatty tissue. So this actually makes sense. It makes sense as to why a lot of people say that when they were younger, they could sit around all day eating crisp sandwiches, take no exercise, and yet they were skinny. When they did get fat, it would burn off really quickly. But as they got older, the kgs just stacked up and up and up. And look around you. The same thing is happening to you in your middle age is happening to other people in their teens and even earlier. The problem is hyper-processed foods, intensively farmed foods, and the processors of factory farmed foods. They're all equally responsible for the poor health of our nations. Who's going to bother sourcing, preparing and cooking a nutritious meal when it's just as simple to microwave something pretty much edible because it's been laced with sugar to make it taste less awful? Who's going to resist portrayals of happy kids tucking into a burger that's got salad in it? Forget that there's loads of sugar in the tomato sauce and the mayonnaise and plenty more in the bun. Don't start on the fries or the soft drink. Australia, Canada, the USA and the UK all have particularly poor diets, relying far too heavily on cheap processed foods and sugars. And they're also, on a global scale, spectacularly rich and have got advanced medical care systems in place. What a shame that they all concentrate on treating those who bear the consequences of poor advice and poor choices, and far less on providing comprehensive testing as an early warning system. The growth in the burden on healthcare systems is unsustainable, and it's forecast to grow exponentially. I'd imagine that in Britain we need to do something, or in the next 10 years our jewel in the crown NHS will cease to be as we know it at the moment. My solution, and please bear with me as I'm only a taxi driver, not a sitting MP or a medical expert, But my solution is to implement a series of health tests. Now, bear in mind that we have a direct correlation between insulin resistance, diabetes and metabolic syndrome, and the massive impact they have in making people severely ill with heart disease, etc., 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 as I listed in the earlier videos. Now just imagine if every adult was subjected to an annual barrage of blood and urine tests and whatever others felt were necessary, and it was all paid for by the NHS. And nowadays it's possible to identify even cancers early via just a simple blood test. We can also measure blood cholesterol, sugar, triglycerides, insulin levels, and a host of different things. We can identify insulin levels in the blood, for instance, to show how hard the pancreas is having to work in order to keep blood sugar levels down. And through this testing, we would know when insulin resistance is beginning to take control. We would know even before someone is becoming pre-diabetic. We shouldn't need to wait until the system fails and blood sugar becomes uncontrollable, with everything that knocks on from that. We can measure ketones, which is a reliable indicator that the body is burning up its fat reserves. It's the only way that ketones are produced. And you measure that by peeing onto a stick and putting the stick in a meter, for crying out loud. Like I said, it's not rocket science. Now, imagine how many potentially devastating illnesses could be nipped in the bud by testing. Imagine how many lives could be improved by testing and how many lives could be saved by testing. We have epidemics of obesity, of diabetes, of heart disease, of dementia, and everything else. We need to get away from the current thinking that people are too lazy or too dumb or too feckless to change their ways. We need to give them the proper information and help them to make the right decisions, because it will save billions and stop families from being destroyed unnecessarily. Now, don't tell me that people aren't interested. Look what happened with smoking. When I was a kid, I can't think of many adults that didn't smoke. When I was a kid, for that matter, I can't think of many children that didn't smoke. Now look, the will is there if people are correctly informed and educated. We could test every adult every year for a few £100 each, paid for with the NHS, and maybe a tax on the producers of all the rubbish food. But we would save billions by not letting them slide into ill health, into needing complex treatments, and on being drug dependent for decades of their lives. I'm no politician, I'm no doctor, but if I were either, I'd be campaigning for this to become the standard. If we're going to have an NHS in 30 years' time, it will need to become more proactive with regard to preventable illnesses, and we're going to need to give hormones the attention they deserve. Thanks for watching. Take good care of yourselves. Chat soon.